All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. So I'm Donna Couture, and I am the president of the ELO network here in New Hampshire. I also am an ELO coordinator at Winnicott High School in Hampton, New Hampshire, and have been sort of involved in ELOs in some capacity or other for the last, I would say, 10 years, give or take. So I've been pretty embedded in it in terms of implementing it at the high school level, but also making sure that our educators are well trained and there are materials available for them. So my role has been varied, but my focus has always been on making sure we have high quality programs happening in New Hampshire around ELO implementation. And so hopefully you guys can see my screen, but before I jump into that, I just want to introduce a colleague of mine.
I'm going to just stop for just a second, Donna.
Sure.
If you are on with us with a phone or microphone, if you could please put yourself on mute until you might want to speak, because the background noise picks up very readily. So thank you. Okay, sorry, Donna. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. And so a colleague of mine is joining me who I know has been connected, not her personally, but her organization, the New Hampshire Virtual Learning Academy Charter School, VLAX as it's known. Lisa Kent is joining me. Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to just say a quick hello, and I know you said it earlier, but we have a new person on.
Good morning, everybody. I also work with our state group for Elon. I am the secretary with that group. I formerly did ELOs at a public high school for 10 to 15 years, Sauhegan, and now in the last 5 to 7 years, I've been doing ELOs with VLAC. So pleasure to join you all.
And so, thanks, Lisa. And so what I thought we would do today is I was going to share with you a little bit about who the ELO network is. And so what you have up in front of you is our soon-to-be launched website. We haven't had our own up until this point. We've sort of been a part of other organizations, and we've progressively have made a lot of headway in organizing ourselves so that we could become our own entity, our own professional organization. And so along with that comes with developing this website. So what you have in front of you is just what our homepage is going to look like. And as soon as that launches, I'll be sure to connect it with you. But the reason I'm pulling this up is because I thought it might be nice for you to see some photos of our leadership team. So Lisa and I are there. We also have a Vice President, Sean Peschel. All of these individuals work currently in high schools as ELO coordinators. We have divided our state into regions, and there are regional chairpersons that will organize professional development and support that is needed in those regions, as well as be a conduit for communication between what we're doing at the state level and how that filters down and affects our regional individual districts. So that's what those individuals are there to represent. And then we have a few other members who, from other districts, who are part of our leadership team. So we're beginning to get started, but I thought I would share just so you could see what Lisa and I look like. So that's just a brief understanding of where we're at. Currently, we have about, I would say, close to 50% of our schools have somebody in charge of facilitating ELOs, either full-time or close to it. And the other percentage, other 50%, I think are schools who are on a continuum of either not implementing currently, or I would say the majority of that other percent is really like vacillating between, do we hire somebody full-time that's going to do this? Is it somebody's responsibility to manage ELOs. So are they teachers? Are they school counselors? Are they transition coordinators? They may have other titles and other responsibilities, but they are starting to implement ELOs in some capacity. So it's our responsibility to, as a network, to support them, to get them to full high quality program implementation, and to provide that whatever support they need in order to get there. So that's a little bit about the network. I'm going to pause there for a second and just ask if there are any specific questions about the structure of our network, any questions about how we support individual districts. Okay.
This is Marcia. I think I will ask a quick question.
Go ahead.
When you said, you share the structure, who is supporting this? I mean, you guys are all kind of volunteering your time, or is this under the Department of Ed at all, or how does this structure come together?
That's a great question. We are all independent of the Department of Ed, so we are definitely we have our full-time positions as ELO coordinators in our districts, and we are volunteering our time, or rather our district administrators are supporting our connection and our structure on the leadership team within the network. So one of the goals, so one of the goals of our network is to become our own nonprofit, and so that we could accept some funding, we'll certainly reach out to and accept funding to support some of the more organized trainings and workshops and conferences that we have started to put on. Right now we're putting them on and doing them in conjunction with other entities in New Hampshire, other organizations who have the funding to support them. They've partnered with us, we deliver the training, and they support any financial need that goes along with that. Some of the time that's come from the DOE, but largely that comes from other nonprofit organizations. Okay.
And how long have you guys kind of been going down this path of the ELOs?
Lisa can help me out on this a little bit too. I know that in 2005, it was sort of just released, the concept of ELOs, and the first grant that came, and I think it was a partnership between the Department of Ed and I think it was Nellie Mae rather, provided some funding that worked, I think piloted it, ELO programming in 5 schools, and then it sort of took off from there. So if this sort of fledgling group of ELO coordinators began out of that group in 2005, 2006, and has just been sort of developing ever since. Lisa, do I have that right?
Yeah, and it was about 7. It was in my early days of VLAX when we were finalizing that survey. So that it started maybe in 06, and it kind of thread through 2011. And from 11, it's really formalized after that sort of catalyst. That survey propelled us, I think, gave us a little bit of momentum going forward. So since 11, we've been on a quick trajectory, but from 06 to 11, it was a little R&D, trying to gather data, get a sense of what everybody was doing, and then we streamlined and sort of normed ourselves from 11 to now 18.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Lisa, when you say you normed yourselves, one of the questions I had for you is that we, as a Michigan co-op, developed a document called the Protocol for Quality Programs to kind of not standardize the opportunities, but standardize the qualities, if you will, so that there are expectations. When you said you normed them, is that what you're kind of talking about, is creating a structure under which ELOs would exist so that there are expectations for their quality?
Yeah, and I think Donna's either going to add to what I say, or she's going to directly speak to this as she moves into her presentation. But when I say normed, I would say three things happened. Because we all deprivatized our work, we had an awareness of what other people were doing. So certainly that raised your game, if you will, as you saw different ways of accomplishing the same thing that people were doing. So we started norming, I would say, the people, meaning the way in which we had our title or our job description, our role and responsibility. The second thing I would say we normed would be our process. And so while there still remains local control and not everyone can have the same process due to different school boards or different, budgets, and for different reasons, we, as closely as we could, normed our process with the way in which ELOs sort of are born. And then the third thing I would say that we quote unquote normed is the quality of product. And we started talking about sort of content, competencies, the way in which they're assessed, the way in which they're supported by a mentor, outside expert, or a high quality teacher. So kind of all three things were normed in a collaborative way. And I wouldn't say they're all the same. They're just more, we're all speaking the same language. And I think there's a wider understanding of where the nuances still or need to exist. But in large part, we're all on the same page.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your learning on maybe a little bit more. And if you don't kind of address some of that, which is fine, maybe at some point you could share some of those, normed structures with us. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That was pretty succinct, and I definitely will jump into that. I will say that our focus, as Lisa indicated, is definitely to make sure that we are focused on a very research-based, experience-based structure in terms of our program development and our individual ELO implementation. And so really when I'm presenting or giving any insight into how successful some of our exemplary programs, or how they got to be so successful, it's really because they tackled it in really those two concepts. How are they building a high quality program? And within that, how are they building a high quality ELO for their student? And so before I dive into that, I just wanted to ask a quick question. You should be seeing now on your screen what are ELOs according to the New Hampshire DOE. And my question is that minimum standards, that underlined section of words there, can you click on that? Are you able to click and access the link? Or is that not possible?
No,
I didn't think so. And so what I will do is I'll follow up with this presentation. I will send this presentation out to all of the attendees, and so that you will have access to these links. So basically what that link sends you to is our minimum standards for public school approval in terms of how they are defining ELOs and how they're asking schools to implement them. And so here's a definition in sort of bulleted form as to how we generalize the concept of ELOs. Basically, ELOs have to happen anytime. They have to happen at any place. So we're talking within a high school structure is certainly fine, but definitely in the community outside of those four walls is preferable. Any pace, meaning this needs to happen when the student is ready based on their needs, and it could take an entire year, it could take a couple of months, it could even span a couple of years. Really, it has to be designed for the best needs and interests of the student. And any method just means that you're going to see some critical components that have to be met for each ELO, but the way in which those critical components are met can really depend on the student's needs and abilities and interests. So the method in which you carry those out can be varied. In this sort of shaded in, grayed in area, you see a list of bulleted concepts. These are things that we found in New Hampshire, and I'm sure in your state as well, that typically happen already, right? So these are things that are like the things we've just described, independent studies, private instruction, internships, community service, apprenticeships. Those are concepts that have been around a long time. And so what we try to do, again, focusing on developing a program, what you try to do first is just sort of do an assessment of what exists already. What are your, we term them almost ELOs. So if you're looking at a district level, school level, what are some things that are already happening, and what makes them successful? What makes them necessary? What makes them, how have they endured over the years? What makes them, something that students are interested in taking, and teachers and educators are interested in helping to support. And so what we try to do is, after that assessment, then sort of evaluate, where do we go from there? How do we bring those experiences into high quality experiences? So high quality ELO experiences. So I will just jump in here and just say, at Winnacunnet, where I'm currently an ELO coordinator, we've sort of taken that idea of, okay, what already existed before I came here 5 years ago. Independent studies, internships, that was pretty typical experiences. But we also had these students who were engaging in what we called service aid experiences. And those were those students who were basically helpers in the classroom. So some of them did something simple as, I'm just going to go make copies and help support my teacher in that way. And others were actually acting as almost interns, helping to teach a class that they've already taken. And so I sort of did that assessment of what already exists and redefined what types of ELOs can exist in my school. Not every school does this, but I found it was successful in the fact that you don't want to go in after you've done that assessment of what's an almost ELO and then overnight try to change it and make sure that those meet high quality component expectations. You sort of want to take that slowly. And so my effort in having 6 types of ELOs was because in their own right, a lot of these things are very worthy educational experiences for our students, but they may not meet every single expectation of a high quality ELO. But I didn't want to get rid of them. I sort of wanted to develop a continuum. So if you look at service aids, that's sort of one end of the continuum, all the way up to project-based learning. And so I would argue that the rigor and depth of knowledge increases as a student engages in these different types going down the list of types of ELOs. So I'm going to pause there because I've said a lot, and I just want to know if I'm sort of on track with what you were hoping to hear in terms of where we started.
Does anyone have any questions? You can either put them into the chat section, or you can open up your microphone or your phone, unmute yourself, and jump right in. I appreciate all of this so far, so I just say,
okay, great.
Going. This is great.
All right, well, I'm going to assume that we're on the right track. And so one of the things here is that we start to assess is, okay, so here are those experiences. I've identified them as almost ELOs. I sort of know that they're very successful in their own right, but I know that they could get better. I know that we can add more rigor. I know that we can expand them, and the depth of knowledge the students are engaging in can increase. And so how do I get there? And so some of the work that the New Hampshire ELO Network has done in conjunction with the Department of Ed and other educational entities over time has developed these high quality ELO components. And so I'm showing you them here in bulleted form. But what I'm also going to share with you, and forgive me for a minute, I'm just going to switch over to another screen. Tell me if you're seeing a new screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. And so what you're seeing here, I'm going to kind of scroll through here for a second. What you're seeing here is a document that our network has just developed. And please understand that some of this what we're telling you has, been happening in various capacities and has existed in various forms, whether it's online or in a manual or what have you, for a long time. But one of the things the network has decided to do was to simplify our communications in terms of those critical components. People are like, we know they exist, we know that they're out there, we know what we have to look for, but it's so cumbersome to really kind of filter all that information down to the basics that we felt we needed to do that. So this high quality framework, I'm going to, forgive me, scroll through at the moment to get to a part that I want you to see. Basically, we'll list 6 critical components for any ELO. So this is any high quality ELO, no matter what the topic area, no matter what the location, who's involved, what the student's interest level is in their abilities, should always have these 6 critical components. And so I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go through those 6 components briefly.
Sounds terrific.
Okay. Sure. So the first critical component is the student has to establish an essential question. So this ties to, okay, so the student has an idea, they have an interest, but we have to help them craft what they're interested in about that topic. And this oftentimes comes in the form of an essential question, but usually starts in just a brainstorming session with a student. Tell me what your goals are. You know, I always say to the student, picture yourself at the end of this experience. What do you want to walk away knowing and being able to do? And so we sort of back up. So that's sort of like UDL, right? Our understanding by design, trying to start, you know, with the end in mind. And so we guide our students in that sense. A lot of them don't understand what it means to form an essential question. So we try to really spend time with the student and break that down for them. We always say it's not something we want you to be able to go on Google and find the answer to, because that's not really an engaging learning experience. We want something that's going to be thought-provoking and require you to engage in a variety of activities in order for you to reach that conclusion. So forming an essential question is really, really important. And this is a step I've sometimes skipped with my students, given the nature of how quick things have to move in education, and thinking we can circle back around to it. And it's always bitten me in the behind when I don't do that. So you always want to make sure that you form that essential question with your student, the first and foremost, before you move on. The next thing to consider are partners on the ELO. And of course, it's always centered around the student and you as an ELO coordinator. Now, you may not have the title of ELO coordinator. Again, your title might be something else. This might be something you're doing in conjunction with your other responsibilities. But there needs to be a facilitator of the process, and that we're calling the ELO coordinator. We also include mentor teachers or teachers for the specific content area of that student. So if it's a science or environmental science, let's say, topic area, we want to make sure that we have science teachers that are weighing in and being a mentor to that student. And in particular, if we have an environmental science teacher, even better. Regardless, though, when possible, high quality tells us that we need to engage them in an authentic setting in the community where there are adults and professionals doing this for a living. So we want to, when possible, connect them to somebody, a community partner that can help them, give them that insight as well. And of course, we always want to include parents and guardians. The other thing, and I'm going to pause briefly after each one in case there's you have a pressing question to ask, but the next one is communication. So this is another thing I sometimes overlook, and one of the things we have to understand is, remember I said that part of the hallmarks of an ELO is that they happen anytime. And so what that means is the student can be working on this once a week, or throughout the week, but they might only, be connecting with you once a week. They might be connecting with you virtually. They might be connecting with their community partners in person. More often they're connecting with you as a facilitator of this, learning experience. And so it's really vital that you put on paper and you're under agreement with all of the partners involved of how regular those communications and connections are with each other and with the student. And so as a facilitator, I'm often asking the student, how often are you checking in with me? Am I seeing you every day? That's a very rare occurrence. But when I do see you, is it in person? Is it virtual? How about your community partners? Are you seeing them every day? Are you connecting with them once a month, and how does that look? Are you connecting with them through FaceTime, or are you connecting with them in person? Are you emailing? Are you journaling back and forth? Those kinds of things have to be outlined, because you will, I'm sure, as you well know, time can get away from you pretty quickly, and before you know it, you're halfway through the experience and you have no idea if the student is meeting their expectations. The next critical component is timeline and benchmarks. I often describe this component of an ELO similar to a course framework or syllabus. And so I tell the student, you're often going into a class and they're handing you basically the plan for the course. This is your opportunity in an ELO to develop your own syllabus. And so you, based on your essential question and the community partner support and the mentor teacher support, all of your partner supports are going to help you define what your timeline and benchmarks are going to be. And so this is where the student illustrates, you know, and you help them along with the activities that they have to engage in. And when you're doing check-ins, this is often something you refer to make sure they're meeting their benchmarks. Okay, the next component is the assessment plan. This is something that's come directly from the Department of Ed back in 2005 when they did their research before launching ELOs in New Hampshire. They basically concluded that in order for an ELO to be a rigorous experience, they have to meet four components, four assessment components. And so those are reflection, research, product, and presentation. And we say those words so often in New Hampshire that you can ask anybody what the four components, assessment components are, and they're going to spit them out to you, no problem. Most people know these by heart, and they understand what each of them are. And so I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I will say that no matter the type of ELO, no matter wherever the student is going to be and what they're doing, their expectation is that they are meeting the requirements, the assessment requirements in each of those four areas.
Donna, we have a question in the chat that says, for which grade levels are ELOs designed? Are ELOs generally for core subjects, electives, or both?
That's a great question. So we've seen ELOs offered for both core and elective credit. I can speak for my own implementation at Winnacunnet High School that we started where they were primarily elective-based credits. So this is above and beyond the requirements for graduation. And so we've slowly in the last 5 years have worked towards supporting students who need an alternative path to reaching core credit for a particular subject area. So whether that's, you know, English or that's PE, we have slowly, you know, working our way that way. VLAX, Lisa at VLAX can speak to this. They primarily do them for core credit. Is that correct, Lisa? Or you do them for every class?
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep this succinct so I don't flood you. It's a different approach. So at VLAX, everything is competency-based. So we share our competencies. It's an open learning catalog. So if you go to vlax.org and click on the learning catalog, we don't call them courses. We call them, basically we call them offerings. And each offering, sometimes people say course offerings, each offering you can do as a course, as a project, or as an experience. And the competencies that go along with any offering, so whether it's biology, social studies, math, like whatever it is, the competencies are awarded based on the student choosing to do it as an experience. So any student can do any sort of course offering in an experience at any point in time.
How about grade levels?
So we are primarily focused on the high school level. However, there are some schools who are implementing ELOs in the middle school level. Lisa, you might be able to speak to that too.
We started at high school only, and we have crept our way into the middle school. We have a middle school as well at VLAX, and middle school students are allowed the opportunity. You are seeing that being requested more and more, I think, in our state. And we also have our homeschool community that accesses VLAX as a supplement to the work that they're doing at home, and middle school students who are also being homeschooled tend to access us in that way as well.
I'll add to that and say that our next expectation for high quality is that it's credit bearing, and so that ties. That's really a conversation about the competencies that you're using. And so we've primarily focused a lot of our effort on the high school level. But one of the things that is common to assess a student on, the competencies that we use tend to be work study practices, those 21st century learning skills for students. And so a lot of the things that we're hearing from the elementary and middle schools are that we want to help our students practice those skills, those competencies, so that they can be more successful in engaging in ELOs when they get to the high school level. And so you will find that at our elementary and middle schools, there's more and more requests to find ways to practice those competencies, but also to engage with the community. And so we find ourselves as high school ELO coordinators or high school educators helping those sending schools do just that.
Thank you.
Right. So that's the conclusion of the 6 critical components to any ELO experience. And again, I'm happy to send that document over to you. And so that you guys will have access to that. But I'll pause there because I want to talk a little bit about programming. But that's essentially developing an individual ELO. And we also have tools and resources, documents in terms of rubrics, worksheets, application materials, and any of those kind of protocols. We do have reference materials that can help you carry out each of those individual components.
I would say the more you can send us, the better.
Okay, great.
I mean, because it's obviously going to help us to move along in the right direction and more quickly with your guidance.
Okay, great. So I'm pausing on this slide because there are all these, anything that's underlined in this presentation will lead you to a resource that will help you in one of these components. And so there's a slide on competencies, and there's some resource materials that can help you not only in developing those competencies, but understanding how they connect to ELOs. Again, I sort of reviewed the roles and responsibilities of those partners who are involved. There's more information about the common this is just an example from a student, but these 4 components I said earlier, these resource lists, these link to not only information for each of the components, but also a rubric. So let me click on one just to show you quickly. So we've developed just a list of things to consider if you're going to research for an ELO, examples of activities that we consider research, links and resources that you can use, things like that. And then there is also a rubric that we use to assess the research that's being done within an ELO. So those are just some of the resources that I can send you. We also have a design plan where all of the things I'm talking about, you sort of have to have some notes and take some notes and write down your plan somewhere. Well, we have templates that can help you do that as well. So we're happy to send that information to you. There'll be in this presentation an example of some of the design templates for a couple of ELOs that you see pictured here. So back to program development. So I said, you know, we've had a large focus on how do we help people implement individual ELOs with their students. Well, the other part of this is, okay, once you've done that, you're going to start to do this more and more, and you're going to build capacity in your school. So you really have to think in terms of program development as well. And this is local program development. And so in your school, you, again, I mentioned earlier, you want to decide, you know, how are you assessing what is already existing and how they can be considered almost ELOs. If you clicked on that resource, there's a chart that can help you assess in your assessment. It's important that at the local level, the school level, you are forming an exploratory committee. And we recommend that the people on the committee be listed here in terms of you want to capture administration, you want, whenever possible, get the folks who are making those resource decisions, like your school board members, you know, your SAU level, excuse me, it's our SAU level, but your district level administrators as well as your high school level administrators. You want to make sure that you have folks from the classroom, but you also want to engage community partners whenever possible. And so if you are starting to explore developing a program, they become really essential to helping you conduct your research. I have a link here to a study that was done that you were referring to earlier in New Hampshire. There's a link to the summary of that study as well. You want to make sure you're developing a policy around ELOs that your district is going to follow. And so I have in here linked to examples of policies that New Hampshire high schools and districts have developed and worked through in terms of identifying the purpose of developing an ELO program, who are the main folks in your school who are facilitating them, what are their responsibilities, what role does administration play, what role does your ELO facilitator play, and so on and so forth. What would the application process or the onboarding process for students look like? Let's, you know, be specific about that in our policies. How were we evaluating them? You know, who's responsible for recording grades and awarding credits? What does that criteria look like? The appeal process. So if a student doesn't agree, does this follow in line with your other courses, or is this a unique process? And you, of course, want to make sure that the integrity of your program is intact when you're considering all of those things. So there's an example of a statewide policy in actually Winnicott's own ELO policy as well. I'm going to pause there. Any questions? Okay. The other thing you're going to want to make sure that you've had some conversation about is risk mitigation. So whenever you're sending a student into the community, you can see here I chose these pictures specifically because I have one student who engaged in an ELO who drag raced his truck, and a lot of the time he spent in a garage or on the track. And I have another student who, as you can see there, did an archery ELO, and so she was practicing with that bow and arrow quite often. And then, you know, of course, we have students who are in any types of experiences in the community and sites. And so you want to make sure they're safe. You want to make sure that you have vetted the people that are working with that student. And so there's a lot of things to consider. You have a duty as a school district, as a school, as an educator, when you're sending those students on those experiences and when you're facilitating them, to make sure that your process and procedure is intact. So we're talking about permission forms. We're talking about making sure the parents know what's going on, that you know, have dotted your I's and crossed your T's in terms of making sure that everybody's accountable and you know where that student is at all times during this process. You also want to make sure that there's proper supervision for when they're working and working through their ELO experience. And you want to make sure that the liability in terms of insurance is outlined and covers enough of possibilities. So I guess what I mean by that is most schools hold a liability insurance binder for students who are off campus, whether they're on field trips or, they might be engaging in learning experiences in other settings, but you want to make sure as you expand your program, you have enough coverage for those students as your program increases. That's been like a hot topic for us consistently, making sure that we are meeting rules and regulations on the local level, but also what the Department of Labor is requiring of us, what our insurance carrier is requiring of us, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I just will say there that we have some information I can give you in terms of language around all of that, and some talking points when you're talking to your administration about liability and risk mitigation. So I can follow up with that. I think we only have about 15 more minutes, so I will try to rush through some of this so we have some time for questioning at the end. But I will also say that whenever you can engage your community partners and celebrate them, it is vital, not only to just inherently because you want to support those learning experiences, but also your community partners become your biggest advocates in moving your program forward and helping you gain resources you need to build capacity for your program. And so what I try to do at Winnacunnet is not only to, give out plaques like you see here, or a sticker that they can put on their business window or their cars that say they're a community partner here at Winnacunnet, but we also have a community advisory board that we have about 10 professionals from our community who've engaged with our ELO program and beyond here at Winnacunnet that help advise us as we move forward. And certainly you want to connect with civic organizations on a regular basis, whether that be the Rotary clubs that you have across the state or in your area, but as well as your Chamber of Commerce. But it will be essential as you do that to make sure that you're providing them with the proper education and training so that they can be helpful and through these learning experiences. There are some assessment tools for you to use from a program standpoint to see not only do you have the things in place in order to run a high quality program. Are you meeting minimum standards as far as New Hampshire's minimum standards are concerned? Are you meeting those? We have those kinds of resources here in New Hampshire. And there's also, we also recommend follow-up surveys for your teachers and your students and beyond that, community partners. And so when the experience is concluded, it's always great from a program standpoint to evaluate their responses to how they feel the experience went. And so as I conclude here, I'll just say this, that as you're going through all of this, the things you really need to consider is, who's buying into this process? How are we meeting those needs of the people who are maybe naysayers or skeptical that a program like this could even work in a public school setting? And so you really have to be thoughtful about how you're connecting not only with the champions of your program, but also those who are skeptical. I think that it's going to be important for you to make sure that you're highlighting and sharing the work of your students as much as possible. So conducting exhibitions of learning or presenting to school board nights or any opportunity where there's a public setting where people can come and observe the results of these learning experiences. That goes a long way in terms of marketing and promoting your program, but also securing resources you need to build capacity. That being said, having a website, having reference materials like pamphlets, things that are just your elevator pitch, things that at the ready to just whenever you see, you could be out at a restaurant, you could be out shopping, and you see a community partner that you would really like to connect with a student. It's really, you're sort of always on. And it's a really good way to promote your program if you have some materials at the ready. Mentor-teacher support becomes a bit of a contentious conversation when we're speaking in terms of union and contract negotiations. These, especially for an institution that doesn't have a system where you can easily support a teacher to engage in these experiences as a mentor, you are trying to find ways to provide them a financial compensation or work within their course load in order to find the time to support students as a mentor in a particular content area. So that becomes difficult to figure out, and work with your administrators on how to do that. So we've had a lot of conversations about that in the state, and some are very successful and others aren't. So it becomes an uphill battle when you have to sort of extend the people who are working with that student beyond just the ELO coordinator. And then, of course, documentation, assessing credit. What does that look like on the transcript? How does that translate to the higher ed folks? And how do we communicate the learning and the competency development that a student has engaged in? So I think all of those things are things to consider, and we don't have a lot of time to get into, but those are certainly great topics for future conversations. We can get into more depth. What we were hoping to do today is just to provide you with a quick overview of things that we constantly work on, and hoping that if you're finding one particular area of interest that you think we should spend more time on in the future, we're happy to do that. Are there any questions, general questions you want to ask, or maybe where we can go from here?
Donna.
Go ahead.
There are 2 questions in the chat, GCM.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Gail asked, what have you found is an optimal student-teacher ratio for these ELOs?
That's a tough one. So we right now, when I have one teacher working with more than one student, because we do have some teachers who are working with just one ELO student in addition to their course load, but we have now piloted an opportunity where teachers have a block of time instead of basically have a reduced course load, and they're assigned for their department to mentor students. Right now, they're averaging about 7 students, but I personally I'd put a cap on that at about 10 or 12, but we haven't reached that cap yet. We're too new in the process. Lisa, would you agree?
So Gail, we're set up a little bit differently. So the expectations on cap and load, if you will, are a little bit. So we have instructors that are experience-based only, and currently they're running at about 20 students at a time. We are dancing a little bit with the idea on, is it too much, is it too little? Every single time, while the competencies and rubrics are the same, the curriculum, if you will, is custom. And anytime something's custom, that means it takes more time to plan, prepare, and make sure that things are streamlined and meeting sort of expectations, and individualized and personalized wherever it can be. So the weekly meetings tends to be we have the expectation that no matter the sort of the plan or program that a student is doing, they will meet weekly with the instructor. So the weekly meetings currently is the tipping point, if you will, of time on, is 20 too much? Is it like, where are we at? We're looking at maybe bi-weekly meetings to help out a little bit, but that's currently we're at one instructor has 20 students at a time, because some of the things are automated with rubrics and competencies and submitting assignments via the online platform that we use as Moodle. So that's why. Donna, the next one is, are you ready?
Yep.
If an ELO is cross-disciplinary, how do you decide which certification the mentor teacher needs, which mentor teacher to assign to the ELO?
And so that's a good question. So we try, first of all, in New Hampshire, as long as we have a certified educator, they can assess the student. And so no matter the content area, as long as they're certified, they can assess a student. That being said, we always want to make sure that the student is engaging with a teacher within the content area of that ELO. And so we may have a student who's engaging in, let's say, an ELO that requires the mentorship of a science teacher and a business teacher. And what we do is one of those teachers, depending on their situation, is assigned sort of the lead teacher. And so they would be primarily concerned with assessing and documenting the assessment of that ELO, but in conjunction with the other partners, certainly. And then the other mentor teacher would have fewer responsibilities. They would still provide assistance in assessment and developing, the activities for that student. But we sort of choose one to be the lead and one not. And to be honest with you, it doesn't matter their content area as long as they're still engaged in the process in some capacity. So hopefully those answers your questions. I know there are only two there, right, Lisa?
Yeah. Yes, there are. And here's Sharon said thank you.
Okay, great.
Let's see, question.
Oh, she also said there was one above. I missed it. There is one more. Are you ready, Donna?
Yeah, go ahead.
It said, you mentioned ELOs can happen at any time, but is a minimum amount of time required by the DOE? And then is the amount of time in an ELO compared, time-based question, is the amount of time in an ELO compared to a traditional building class?
Okay, so that's a conversation we've had quite a bit. So the quick answer is no. We are moving away from time-based. So basing these ELO educational experiences on time. We're trying to move away from that. And so what instead we're doing is making sure the student has met their expectations. So once we outline what the competencies are and the learning goals of that learning experience, as long as the student has met those goals, they can complete that. Essentially, in theory, they could complete that whenever. And so it could take them half the time a course does, or it could take them double the time a normal course does. That being said, it's very difficult to get to that point in an ELO program if your school isn't assessing other courses in that manner. And so what we end up having are hybrid opportunities and a hybrid assessment systems where the student is assessed on the competencies, but it's still structured within a certain time frame. So if you're in a semester schedule, the student may be assessed every semester and recorded every semester. And so, but if a student says, I had hoped to get this done in this semester, but it didn't work out that way, then they would like re-enroll in the experience the next semester. So we might be subject to the institution's methods for assessment and timing for that assessment, but we try to be flexible within that system. So in theory, if you're strictly competency-based, time is not the issue. But we end up in New Hampshire, we end up in hybrid systems. Okay. I'm going to assume that's all for questions.
Yeah, I don't see any other
Is there
chat.
anyone who would like to? I wonder if there's anyone who might want to have a back and forth conversation, open up their microphone or phone to ask questions of Donna or Lisa. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Do you want to convene sort of after this and decide sort of what might be the next step, or do you want to have a conversation about that now?
I think our best bet would be to let everyone process this and then let us also share the recording with the rest of the membership. And then we will kind of come together to see what they see as next steps, because my mind is just going a million directions right now, so I imagine theirs is too. And you really targeted a lot of the conversations that we are also having And a lot of the information that you're going to send to us, I think, will also really help to enhance what we're learning from you guys, and you know, what next steps will be. Knowing too that we're all at different, all the districts are kind of at different levels, if you will, of implementation. So, I mean, this has just been fantastic. I mean, like I said, I know that I'll have a lot of questions as follow-up, and I'm sure they will too. So if that sounds good, I will reach out to you in the near future.
That sounds perfect for us. Yeah, we're happy to continue to help in any capacity, and even if it's even if that's just a sharing of resources or coming together in another webinar to focus on a conversation or one topic area, we are open to whatever your needs are. So I will plan on following up by the end of today with sending you the resources I've alluded to in today, and we'll go from there. If there's something missing, if I've mentioned something that's not listed, then certainly reach out to me anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much
Anytime.
to both of you. All right. We'll be in touch. Thank you. And thanks for everyone who participated.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. We'll talk soon.
Sure. All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.